Dr. Torkil, good to see you. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to be on the show. I'm really excited for this episode.
Good to see you, Nate. I'm excited to be here too.
So, we're going to be talking about HRV, which is your area of expertise. How did you come to be interested in this and do the research that you've done? Can you walk us through just a little bit of your history and how you ended up in this position?
Yeah, I am a doctor. I'm a medical doctor, general practitioner in Norway. And for some reason, throughout medical school and most of my career, I had never heard the term heart rate variability until I was sailing one summer in French Polynesia. I was reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score by
Mm.
Bessel van der Kolk. And there he was describing how they could use heart rate variability as a measure of the autonomic nervous system. That's the first time I heard the term. And I immediately understood the importance of it because I could see that stress is making so many people sick and, is making their lives hard. And that we could have this measure to determine whether you are in the stress state or in the restful state. I understood immediately the power of this biometric. And well, just by the time I understood that we had this biometric in our wearables, like the Garmin watches and the Oura rings and the Whoop bands and all the technology that is in our wearables, and almost everybody have that. And of course, I found out mostly for myself. So for like 2 or 3 years, I was just measuring my own measurements. And then I wrote a book called The Pulse Cure that has been just a huge bestseller in Norway. It has sold the equivalent to what in the US would be like 3 million copies if it was, a US book, in the US audience. So now that is a household concept all over Norway, and everybody I meet knows how to use wearables or that it is an option to do that. And it's been translated into 7 languages, and it really just changed my life from being just a normal doctor to become somebody that people look on the street and come up to me anywhere I go to discuss this. So and uh, and that is because it is helping so many people to have this kind of dashboard, as I call it, a dashboard to your physiology. It's more important than having the dashboard in your car. So you get an insight into what goes on under the hood, so to speak, in your body, and it will reveal so many energy thieves, so many things that will sap you of your forces without you knowing it. But the heart rate will respond to any demand, and this is the way that while we are busy living our lives, having our attention on communicating with people and doing stuff, these wearables keep track of the stress that you are under. And throughout, and with artificial intelligence and algorithms from millions of users, then the Whoop and the Aura and the Garmin will give you the results that is very actionable so that you can mitigate and regulate the everyday stress.
Awesome. So I didn't hear about HRV specifically, but I heard about central nervous system regulation, and I started testing this for myself in like 2008. What I would do is I would put a timer on for 10 seconds and I would take a Sharpie and I would dot a piece of paper as many times as I could in 10 seconds. And I would count my dots. And if my dots were above like 45, I knew I was primed to lift heavier weights and I felt good. And if my dots were below that, I always felt like I needed to recover. And I was in college, so I was drinking a lot, so they were very infrequently above 45. Um, but I want to give you my definition of HRV and tell me if I'm on the right track here. And then kind of if you could explain what this means and how we can actually use this as a metric for tracking our stress, I'd love that. But the way I've heard about HRV is that heart rate variability means it's the amount of time in between your heartbeats. And a higher variability means it's a more variable time between heartbeats. So it'll be short, short, long, longer, and that kind of changes back and forth. And a high HRV corresponds to a central nervous system that is ready to either go into sympathetic nervous system dominance and kind of maybe not fight or flight, but like shake and bake, ready to go. And then it can also shift right into parasympathetic nervous system dominance, rest and digest. So you're ready to kind of account for and acclimate to anything. How right on am I? And what would you add to that?
Yeah, that sounds good. So I would call it the autonomic nervous system instead of the central nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the part of our body that governs, the basic functions in our physiology without us, regulating it or thinking about it. And it's divided into, just as you said, the sympathetic, stressful state, the fight, flight, and freeze, and you said bake and shake and
Shake and
bake. Was
bake.
it shake and bake? Yeah.
I feel like fight or
And,
flight
and
is
I
kind of
think,
like
yeah,
that.
because and that's right, because we learned in medical school that it was the fight and flight system. And this is why I never thought I would be in the sympathetic stressful state, because I was never in that state. But it's very right that I would also call it fun and hunt, and you
Okay.
call it shake and bake, right? So we use it whenever we need to mobilize our forces and use our strengths in whatever, whether it's fun or terrible or whatever. And then on the other side of that, we have the recovery state, and that is when the body and the immune system works at its best. And the good thing is that the heart rate will be differently in these two states. That is the key for these devices to be able to track it. So when we are in the restful state, the heart rate will go up when we breathe in, and it will go down when we breathe out. So there will be a difference between the heartbeats. So that's the heart rate variability. And when we are in the stressful state, the heart will beat very steadily, just like a watch or a metronome. And it's like our ancient operative system will regard that this organism is in danger. We need to use all available forces, even if even when there is less oxygen in the lungs. Because that is why in the restful state, when we breathe out, there's less oxygen. The heart will slow down just a little bit to save some energy while there is less oxygen. In the stressful state, it will keep on beating very steadily to use all available forces. So, of course, there will be a sliding scale from the deep restful mode until the deep stressful mode, and anything in between there. So a good variation, a high heart rate variability is just as you're saying, it's a sign that you're flexible and you're able to be restful and to stress. So it's a good sign.
A lot of times I see people talking about, oh, my heart rate variability is in the 30s all the time. Or how do I get my heart rate variability up to the 90s or the hundreds or whatever else? I've heard though that heart rate variability is very individual and you shouldn't look at it from a like what is mine versus what is yours, but is what is mine in relation to my historical data. Would you agree or disagree with that?
That's right. So there's a huge genetic component to it. That means it's not really useful to compare it with other people's. You should just compare it with yourself, what you're able to achieve on your best days, so that the window, the tolerance window that you have. And so one person with a heart rate variability of 30, for example, could have the same objective health level as another person with 60. But if you look at large populations, the lower the heart rate variability, the sicker they would be. But that's in
Okay.
large populations. So if you pick out two individuals from that, large population, it is not necessarily useful.
Gotcha. But like the law of averages still applies.
Hmm.
Okay. So like kind of just diving right into it, like you've said that personalized medicine is the future in your book, The Pulse Cure. So how do we use HRV to make healthcare and like personalize the healthcare for ourselves less reactive and more preventative? And like, how do we stay out of the medical system? I'm not totally sure what it's like in Norway, but I feel like here in the US, like that's not something that you want to, it's one of those things that once you're in it, you kind of stay in it.
Yeah.
So how do we opt out, use our HRV to our advantage and take advantage of the knowledge that we can get from some of these wearable devices?
Yeah. So of course, what you want is to stay healthy, stay clear of the healthcare system or the sick care system,
There
the
you go. Yeah.
dysfunctional healthcare system, which is I think the same all over the world. Probably worse in the US, but we have the same problems in Norway that we are not metabolically healthy, and so we're not in a good condition. We have poorly working immune systems, almost all of us, and that makes my livelihood. I live from sick people in my daily job, and uh, if and they wouldn't need to come to me as a doctor if they had followed the advice in the pulse cure about how to stay healthy. Then I wouldn't need to see them, and heart rate variability is an important metric to follow because it can help you reach a better health level. Whatever is healthy will produce a better heart rate variability. When you sleep better, you eat better, you move better, you're able to rest better, and so on. You stay clear of alcohol and nicotine and a lot of other stressful stuff. Then you will have better heart rate variability and a larger chance that your immune system has the reserve and capacity to do its job. So that is basically how it works. And when you have control by having this dashboard on your wrist at all times, then it becomes so much easier to prevent getting the diseases or reduce the chances, because you can Google, or maybe now AI, any kind of disease and add heart rate variability, and you will see that they are connected. And there are
Mm.
lots of research showing that. So a good heart rate variability will mean that your immune system is working better and can take care of all kinds of problems in a better way.
Okay, so heart rate variability being linked to immune system function is one of the main ways that we can use this tool to our advantage to stay out of the medical care system.
Yeah.
So let's talk about kind of like the pro, like the positives and the negatives. How do we impact our HRV? You mentioned anything healthy is going to positively affect your HRV. What is something though that people perceive as healthy, but that actually is detrimental or tanks the HRV?
That depends, because most of the things that we know are unhealthy will be shown in a worse heart rate variability. So the key is that we are able to observe it, which motivates us to do the hard things, to stay away from the alcohol or minimize alcohol. Alcohol is the worst stressor of all. And I used to drink alcohol every day because I thought it would be relaxing and down stress me, so that it's exactly the opposite. So that could be one thing, that many people think that alcohol will make me relax in the evening, so it should be a good thing. And when you see it on your heart rate, that you probably discovered already when you were doing this Stone Age measurements, uh, alcohol is the worst thing. So other than that, you could be exercising too hard. So
Hmm.
if you're exercising too hard compared to your overall situation, maybe you have a busy job, a busy family life, and then when you exercise, you'd go all in. Maybe that would be too much. So I see a lot of people getting into a burnout situation, training too hard, because there would be a difference between what the level of intensity that you need for health reasons and for performance. So for health reasons, then you don't need to push yourself so hard. And you
That's
would be
really
able to
interesting.
see that you're overtraining. You would be able to see that in your heart rate variability.
I want to come back to how we can actually track single variables and especially in our fitness trackers. But what's one thing that you feel like has the highest positive correlation with improving your HRV? What would you add in? Because I noticed there was one thing specifically that when I started doing this every day, my HRV improved by like 10, 15 points every day. But I'm
Mhm.
curious from your perspective what that
So
would be if you had to
if you
pick
were
one.
drinking alcohol,
Mhm.
that would be the biggest difference.
Cutting that
I
out.
haven't I haven't met anyone that has started to track their heart rate variability that has not cut down on alcohol. Another thing would be to avoid late night meals.
Mm.
So they would soon stop eating after 3 hours before bedtime, for example. So that would be the two big ones. Over time, you would see that if you improve your fitness level, which of course depends on which level you start from, if you start from a poor fitness level, you would see a difference in your HRV as soon as you get a better fitness. That would be if you start from, for example, a VO2 max of 33. Like a friend of mine did that. He started half a year ago with 33 in VO2 max, started exercising, and is now a VO2 max of 41, which is really, really good, a really good improvement. But if you already did have a quite good fitness level, maybe it would be very hard to improve that. It's a very slow metric to change if you're already in a quite good fitness level.
For me, what I noticed the big difference was when I started incorporating daily walks. Walking
Mm.
like 15 to 30 minutes a day seemed to really help me ramp that up. Being in pretty good shape and also not drinking a lot, and having a lot of good healthy habits, that seemed to make a real positive impact on my HRV scores.
Yeah.
So
And
let's
also, a
talk.
lot of people will find that cold exposure would also help a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as too much or too much sauna exposure also?
That would also depend on your overall situation because being in the sauna, being hot, is a really huge stressor for your system.
Hmm.
So that would be even if there's you're in Arizona, if there's a heat wave, that would be really, really tough on your heart rate variability. Of course,
Gotcha.
most people would then go into their air conditioned places, but heat is a really, really tough. It's really hard, which is why the gross national product or how much people make, that will be further away from the heat, so to speak. So
Mm.
the hotter the area, the less productive in terms of production, and so probably because it's really hard to work hard when it's really hot because your body is just coping with the heat, right?
Mm. That makes sense. I've noticed that when I train outdoors in the summer, because I have a garage gym, no AC in it, and so if I start training outdoors in the summer, I feel like I'm not as affected by the some of the heat when it gets up to like 40, 40, 45 here, 110, like 18.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
to
but I think you're right. It's like
acclimatize.
the
Yeah,
dose makes the poison, right? Like,
yeah,
if you are completely under recovered, you're not sleeping enough, and you add in even like 3 medium resistance training sessions per week, that might be too much for your body to recover from. So it's good to keep that in
yeah,
mind that like you have to have that balance in all things.
yeah. And you need to be good at recovery.
Hmm.
So
True.
there's no point in putting more intensity to your workouts if you don't allow your body to recover to build itself stronger. And here is what heart rate variability is a really good aid to see when you're able to train. Like my Garmin watch would give me a training readiness every day that I can use to see how much can I push myself every day.
Okay.
And I must say that when I'm talking about micromanaging your stress levels, like I do in my book and on podcasts, it's really Garmin that has this 24/7, from minute to minute stress levels that you can
Oh,
follow and find out that okay, the stress was high after that meal, and it was probably the gluten or milk that did it, right? That you would not
interesting.
be able to identify with Whoop or Aura or many other devices.
So I do see my daytime stress in my Aura app, and I can kind of see it tracking a little bit like ups
Yeah,
and
but
downs.
it's
You're
very,
saying
very rudimentary. Yeah,
okay compared to the Garmin?
yeah, yeah.
Interesting. All right, I was going to ask about that. Um, so like yeah, because I was curious how we could isolate a single variable. Is that possible if
Yeah.
you have the Whoop or the Aura, or is if you're trying to isolate like
You
single
can
variables
see
like that?
here on of course, if you're listening, you can see it, but you can see here how much more
Yeah.
actionable this is. With the blue here is the parasympathetic, and the orange, different degrees of stressful state. So
Okay.
it's a much easier to identify the different stressors.
Okay. Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Um, is there any way for us to monitor that without having the Garmin? Or if you're really
No,
interested, you need to
no.
upgrade.
That there will be devices like for the first couple of years, I was
Mhm.
using an ECG based monitor that I would
Mm.
have to tape to my chest every day, and so it was more cumbersome. And then I had used that for 2 years which is why when I understood that Garmin had the same system in their watches, I knew how valuable this was because I
Okay.
could compare it to what I've been using on the ECG, and I could see that their numbers or their graphs were as close to the ECG gold standard as it was possible to come. So for
So
most of the
really,
doctors,
it gives you that data.
if they saw that the Garmin, they call it the body battery, and I think most doctors before my book thought that this is just a gimmick. This can't be true. This can't be valuable. It's just it's a Walt Disney kind of thing. It's not real. But I knew that it was real because I'd been using the ECG monitor for 2 years. So that's
Gotcha.
probably the reason. Yeah.
So it just provides us with real-time feedback of how things are affecting our bodies and our stress levels. And like if you go into a hard exercise session, I'm sure you're going to see a spike in your stress levels. And do you see a decrease in your HRV during intense resistance training or intense exercise?
Or you wouldn't see anything. It will just black out the period where you're exercising, probably because it will be high anyway, and if it would maybe scare you from exercising.
Oh,
So
interesting.
you can see here that
You had that block in the
here
middle there
where
that's
I've been
missing.
exercising, it's just black.
Okay.
Maybe there's probably some reason for that. So
Uh-huh.
that you wouldn't, so that like the intense graphs would not scare you away from exercising. But the most important thing is not how your heart rate responds as you're exercising, is how it responds afterwards, how fast you will go back into the parasympathetic mode. That is much more important, and it will depend a lot on the level of lactic acid. So I can see if my activity is so intense that there will be a lot of anaerobic activity, then I will need a lot more recovery time. So after every workout, I will get a recovery time from Garmin that will say that, okay, now you need 44 hours or 59 hours, or after VO2 max test of 8 minutes, I got 96 hours of recovery time.
And that's the one you did on the treadmill where it gradually increases in incline and speed.
Yeah, while I could run in zone two for like an hour and a half, and I would get 20 hours or maybe 24 hours. So and I can see from how my heart rate responds afterwards that this is true.
That's fascinating. It's not about what you are during the exercise. It's about how fast you can recover and get back to parasympathetic nervous system baseline.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like most people will look at their data on their Aura, their Whoop, or whatever, and ignore 90% of what they see. What's the one screen that we should be checking, or one metric or data point that we should be checking every single day?
Yeah, that would be the heart rate variability overnight. So
Okay,
all the
overnight.
devices will give you an HRV that will be measured throughout the night. So some will emphasize more the first part of the night, maybe, or the second part of the night. So you will get different readings. My Aura would be 10 numbers below my Garmin, and my Whoop band will be somewhere in the middle. But they
Okay.
will move at the same, waveform, so to speak. So you shouldn't really
Um,
compare the numbers that you would get from the different devices. But HRV overnight would be the most consistent thing to follow that you would get from all of these devices. The problem is that it's only with the Garmin that you can see exactly where the problem came. Whether it was the late night meal or the intense workout, that would be harder to see in the other measurements. But the advantage of Aura and Whoop is that you can put down in a journal and tag whatever you did that day. So that's an advantage that you don't have in the Garmin.
okay. So
And
if,
of
as long as
course,
you
and
stay
of
on top of that, you can actually start process of elimination, figuring out.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, if you don't want a watch, then it's less intrusive to have a ring or a band that doesn't have a screen on it. And or if you really wanted to have an Apple Watch or another kind of watch, yeah.
Are we looking for any sort of like type like upswing, downswing with our HRV overnight? When I look at mine, usually there's kind of just, it looks like they're just random, just kind of ups, there's downs, but there's not really like a,
It will usually depend on the sleep stage. So when you're in the REM stage, that will have an impact on the heart rate variability and the deep sleep and so on. So you will see those fluctuations, and that just means that you are going in and out of the different sleep phases quite regularly, and you have a very good heart rate variability, as I could see there. So
yeah, I feel like, I mean,
seems
it's been pretty good. I stay pretty healthy. I usually have a lot of energy and I feel good, optimistic. I can tell when I don't, and I have like my comes in half of what it normally shows. I just feel like I'm dragging more that day, feel more sore,
yeah,
like
yeah.
inflamed.
And then you're able to do something about it, to take a day off or slow down for a day or two. And I think the most important with these devices is that it will help you to prevent getting into a burnout situation. At least I'm not, probably in the US, but in Norway, there's so many people going into burnout situations. So they're overstraining themselves, and we are not really equipped to feel this burnout. We get used to this. We get used to having low energy. So many people go into the burnout. But these devices would tell you long before that you are pushing yourself too hard and you need to ease off. And the Oura Ring would just tell you that you need a rest day. It will just stop measuring, throughout the day, right?
Yeah.
So
So so aside from like letting Aura dictate what, like when we're resting, obviously like you get sick and it's like, hey, are you feeling okay? You see like decrease in your HRV, an increase in your body temperature, increase in your respiratory rate, increase in your heart rate in general. Um, but like, what's the red flag that's like, hey, you need to back off right now? Is it like 3 days in a row of a 50% decrease in your HRV? Is it one day we need to pay attention to that? Like, how do we manage our hectic lives, busy exercise schedules, off plan eating, while still looking at this and making good decisions using the data we have available?
yeah, it will be very individual. So it will depend on so many things. But once you get the insight into the system, you will learn how your body works. You will get to know your body better. And a lot of people, of course, say that why should we need these devices? Why can't we just listen to our body? But we are really poor at doing that. And we never really had a sense that would help us. Our eyesight, our hearing, our smell and taste, they're all directed outwards towards outward threats because that's been historically throughout the evolution the places that the threats to our life and health came from. But now the threat to our existence and health comes from the inside, from too much stress compared to what we are constructed to tolerate and still have a functioning immune system. So, so once you're able to control that, when you see kind of the dashboard, you see how much energy you have, you see the intensity, then it's much easier to maneuver and navigate your stress system. And it will be highly individual. So although we would usually react to the same things, the degree to how you or I react to alcohol or exercise or whatever, for women, the period, the week before menstruation, for example, can be a huge physiological load on the system. And often it's as becomes visible in the heart rate variability just as a strong COVID infection, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that surprises many women. And that is probably why women are the ones who are most fond of using these devices. You would think
Interesting.
that it would be men because they're more performance, interested in performance and technology and so on. But actually, I think 80 or more percent of the ones who contact me and follow me on Instagram and so on would be women because their hormones are more difficult to take into consideration compared to men. So the week before menstruation, most women would need to ease off on their training and sleep more, uh, stay away from alcohol, eat better, although that because they feel low, they would crave getting some fast carbohydrates,
Hmm.
which would just further deteriorate their stress levels. So a lot of people also find that ultra processed food, and particularly the addictive kind
Hmm.
of it, is really detrimental to the stress levels.
Yeah, you mentioned listening to your body, but whenever I do that, my body's like, "You should eat Oreos," and I'm like, "That's a great idea."
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah, but crazy about the menstrual cycle. I feel like women have it so much harder than guys in a lot of ways. Like to
yeah,
spend a week every 4 weeks with what your body is perceiving as a COVID infection, and
yeah,
that's just how life is. That's wild.
yeah.
So yeah,
And the good thing is
props to
that
the women out there.
once you learn to mitigate the stress, you can flatten that curve, and
Okay.
you will have much less PMS symptoms.
Interesting. Okay.
Hmm.
So if you learn to listen to your body's signals, know when that's coming on, and then
Yeah,
adequately rest and recover, and giving yourself like the time that you need to actually feel your best, you can lower that impact.
yeah.
Fascinating. So you've seen thousands of patients. What is something that HRV has told you before a blood test or a physical exam could have?
The HRV would tell me so much more about the stress level that this person is under. So, and that is the problem with so many of the modern day diseases, the fatigue problems, having brain fog, having too little energy. It often is not visible in the blood tests or any of the other tests that we can do, but it becomes visible in the heart rate. So it gives an insight into the physiology that we have no other means to do. And of course, a huge advantage is that the patient has it themselves. So the first thing in my book is a quote by Dr. Albert Schweitzer, a doctor, 150 years ago or so. He said, "The doctor of the future will be oneself." And with the new technology, also like with continuous glucose monitors, and probably there will be a lot more technology coming, uh, we're able to be the CEOs of our own health. We don't need to go to the doctor and wait for the results that we may not even understand. We can take charge ourselves. And I think, and of course, when we have artificial intelligence that can help us, it's even like I can put my numbers into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT could give me advice on what to do, and I can see that they're right. You can even upload your graph from the Garmin watch, and it will tell you to how to interpret it. So this is just a start of a revolution where you get the control into your own hands.
That's fascinating. What's a myth about HRV or stress recovery that kind of drives you crazy every time you hear it?
Hmm. I don't know. There wouldn't be too many other than that is very personal. Um, that would be the most important misunderstanding. Maybe not a myth, but a misunderstanding that one person would say that okay, if we the two of us could have the same objective health level, even if you have an HRV of more than 100, and I usually have like 45 or 50. So I think that would be the main thing, that you cannot use that number for more than find out how you are doing. So on your worst day, probably you would be in your 50s, and that would be I would be happy, to be in the 50s in the heart rate variability. So, but still, we could have the same objective health level.
Got it. So like given a long enough time frame, could someone who averages between like 30 and 40 move up and start averaging between 90 and 100, or is that just not even something, because you said there's such a high genetic component to this
They
HRV?
could, they could, but that would mean that their starting level would be poor. So if you were drinking alcohol every day, or almost every day, if you were using nicotine, and yeah, if you had a poor fitness level, that you were not exercising at all, maybe you were sleeping 5 hours a night, thinking I can sleep when I'm dead and so on, then yes, you could do that. But that would be the result more that you had a terrible starting point.
Got it.
So absolutely, I've heard of people who have been able to double their heart rate variability. Another thing that is also really important is sun exposure. So in
Say
the
more about that.
winter,
Yeah.
particularly in the north, then it's really hard to get enough sunlight during the winter. Particularly in Norway and Alaska and these places. So getting proper sun exposure is also important, and we can see it in the heart rate variability that it will be improved.
Any specific time of day? Everyone always talks about AM sunlight, but is it just sun exposure in
Yeah,
general?
yeah, AM sunlight would be better, probably because it would prepare your skin for a stronger UV radiation later in the day. So, of course, in Norway, the UV index is rarely above 5 or 6. While probably in Arizona, I'm not sure of what it would be. Maybe it would be 10 by now. So,
I
so
just
there
go
will be a
outside
huge
and I start
difference.
turning red right away. It's you can feel it. You can feel your skin burning. It's what's wild.
Yeah, yeah. So then, of course, there will be different advice to be given to me in Norway than you in Arizona. There will be a huge difference in the radiation. And also here you could probably ask ChatGPT what would be a good measurement because it will also depend on your Fitzpatrick scale, your skin, and you would need to probably slowly, as springtime comes, to slowly improve the time out in the sun to develop some solar callus.
Okay, gotcha. Now, in the book, The Pulse Cure, you mentioned that like having an active idea of what your HRV is and then working to improve it can add 24 years to your life. Like that's a pretty big claim. How is that talking about someone who's coming from drinking all the time, 5 hours of sleep, really, really poor results, and then changing their behaviors and their
Exactly.
lifestyle? Okay.
Exactly. More or less how I was living. I've done all the mistakes in my book. And these results that you can gain 24 years of extra lifetime comes from a huge American study with more than 700,000 US military service people that showed that if you start when you're 40 to have more or less exactly the same lifestyle as I'm describing as ideal in the Pulse Cure, then you would have 24 years compared to one who has the opposite. So, and those strategies would be to have good sleep, good nutrition, to exercise regularly, minimize alcohol, cut smoking, have good relationships, having good stress management, and also staying away from opioids, which is something I don't have in my book. But the other ones I emphasize that is important. And on the other hand, if it was on the opposite side, you have poor relationships, you're smoking, you're drinking too much, you're sleeping too little, and so on, you do everything wrong, then you would live 24 years less than the ones who do it right. And I can also see that from a clinical experience that this is true. If you do all of those things right, your chances of getting into your 90s and still be vital and have your brain span, your brain working, is quite good. If you do everything wrong, then getting into your 70s, you would be lucky just getting into your 70s, and you would not be able to do it without having huge health problems that will be obstruct your way of chances of living a full life.
That makes sense. So, like your book's dominated the bestseller list. You crushed it in Norway. It's been translated into, you said like 13, seven different languages,
So
13.
seven languages, yeah.
So, like, I'm sure you've heard from readers who have experienced the magic of this. What's a story or result that you've heard from a reader or someone who's put this into practice that absolutely blew your mind?
Probably what is that would be so many people, but it would probably be the ones who discover that they have cancer. and get early, get a diagnosis early, because they could see on their watch that my body is struggling, the heart rate variability is low, I'm doing everything that I can, and it's still low. And they go to the doctor and they find out, okay, it was breast cancer or some kind of lymphoma, and for example. So, and once they get cured, they can also see how their heart rate variability goes back. And then they also feel a bit safer because they have this control, that they know that, okay, the better my heart rate variability is, the better my immune system is working on this. And you could also, Google almost any kind of cancer and add heart rate variability, and you would see that there is a connection also to the prognosis. Once you get the cancer diagnosis, the prognosis will depend often on the heart rate variability. Your chances of getting a relapse will also be connected, associated with heart rate variability. So I would
Wow.
have to say that, yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, last question before we wrap up. You mentioned a couple different things that we can use heart rate variability for. We talked about like global stuff, obviously, just improving your general health and your lifespan and your health span. You mentioned using it as a way of like monitoring your progress. So if you know your historical data and then all of a sudden you're doing everything right, but that it's just that heart rate variability is in the toilet, using that as a metric to go to the doctor and get checked up. What are some other things that heart rate variability can tell us? Like potentially like what time of day to work out, what type of like chronotype we are. What else can we like ascertain from that data that is maybe not like life changing, but like interesting and would help us get to know ourselves and our
Mm.
preferences better?
Yeah, I think you could detect things like vitamin deficiencies. People, particularly women, can find that, okay, when they are iron deficient, can see it in their heart rate variability. If they have a B12 deficiency, for example, they would be able to. Um, they would see that when they are exercising late in the evening and working out too hard, it will affect the sleep. So that they would push their hard exercise further earlier in the day. So that would be something that they would be able to find, and that they would find that certain kind of foods will affect their sleep a lot more than other kinds of food. So, for example, if I want to be sure that I'm eating something that will not stress me, I would have a Caesar salad. I know that that is not going to give me stress. A pizza, on the other hand, would be terrible, really terrible. I've almost not eaten a pizza for a long time, because that's the
Interesting.
worst thing. And that is something I used to eat every day. Uh, 20 years ago, as I was a resident doctor. So uh, that shows you that we're not really good at interpreting our body signals.
Hmm.
I and then and the heart rate will reveal it immediately. So that if I was using it at the time, 20 years ago, I would have seen that when I have the pizza, my stress level is a lot higher. I was shocked, to even understand that my what I was eating had any effect on my stress levels. The first time I understood that was when I was there was probably a birthday at the doctor's office where I was working. So instead of my usual salad, I had two huge slices of cake, and my heart rate went through the roof. It was like 15 points higher. Like it would go from 60 to like 75 for maybe 3 or 4 hours afterwards, just from eating two slices of cake.
Wow.
So these are the things that you discover, and then of course then you know the effect on your system, and you're able to make a more qualified choice whether to eat one or two slices of cake or at all, depending on what you're going to do that day.
Gotcha. Very cool. Okay. This has been very, very elucidating. I've been gotten a lot out of this. And I'm hoping that Oura will ramp up their service so I can start seeing that breakdown that you showed me on Garmin. But if you had to choose one, and we already decided you like Garmin the best, if you had to pick between Oura and Whoop, what would you pick?
Between Oura and Whoop, now Whoop has come with their Whoop 5. With the upgrade
Yeah, I
just
heard
last
about
week.
it.
Yeah, so it would be maybe unfair because maybe they're just phasing out their, it's 4 years since they had the Whoop 4. But I would probably say Whoop instead of Aura.
Okay.
Aura would be better at tracking sleep, but there would just be there's less power in a ring. Of course, there's less space for a battery for the capacity, and so I think it's just more data power in the watches and the Whoop band. But I think Aura is really good to have as a second opinion, and for being better at sleep phases and the sleep how to say quality.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Torkil. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for having me. And I would also say that you don't need to read the book. There's also an audiobook. So many podcast listeners would prefer listening to a book. So
get it on Audible, get it on Amazon, get the Pulse Cure today. Start determining your health based off of your HRV.